Social Hub. I just wanted to do a few general housekeeping rules just so we can have some organization. For one, welcome to our guests. I'm really excited for this conversation. I know many of you are, so I'm not going to hold up much of your time. But just a few things. There is a bathroom right around the corner from here. However, I would highly encourage you to hold it until the conversation is done, because it is a small bookstore. We can hear you flushing, and I'm sure you probably don't want people hearing you in the background. So just I would encourage you to wait if you can. Also, too, if you are interested in purchasing a copy of the book, we do have some extra copies up front. It's highly encouraged, of course, to support the bookstore so we can continue to provide free community events such as these. So I really appreciate your business. Flint, this bookstore in particular is the only bookstore that has visiting authors. So I want to show publishers that, guess what? You can count on us to have some really interesting authors and thinkers of this generation, and we deserve to hear different perspectives. So please continue to support us. Follow us on social media. If you're on Facebook, it's Comma Bookstore and Social Hub. If you're on Instagram, it's just Comma Bookstore. If you want to go on our website, it's www.commabookstore.com, and you can sign up for our newsletter. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on over to our moderator and author. Thank you.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Kayla Ruble. I'm a local investigative reporter. I grew up about an hour north of here, and I've been covering the Flint water crisis since 2015, and mostly for national outlets. You've probably seen my documentary on PBS Frontline about the Legionnaires' outbreak during the water crisis. If not, you should check it out. And I've been fortunate enough to get to know Jordan Sheridan, who's our author today, over, I guess, the last several years, or however long we've known each other, overlapping a lot within our reporting. And so I'm super excited to get to talk to him today about his book, which has just been released officially. I see a lot of you already have copies. And we'll try to go between getting in the weeds of all the crazy stuff he's uncovered and revealed that I think a lot of people in the room will be super interested in, and then also not getting too into the weeds, so some viewers outside of this bookstore who've maybe never heard of the Flint water crisis will learn something too. So I think we were hoping to start with Jordan, with you reading a bit of your book.
Thanks for coming. Just want to say, I know this day is, my name, but this is a really badass journalist, and there are very few who have stayed on this nationally, and she's one of them. So she has been digging and digging and digging for many years, and has been hit with some roadblocks by larger media who didn't perhaps want to publish her work. So kudos to you, and thank you for doing this. I just picked a couple spots. I guess I'll read sporadically as we go. I'm going to start with the beginning of the book because I kind of think it sets the tone with, shall we say, some less than clean government that was going on here. So this is when Richard Baird, who was the governor's number two, basically, his right-hand man, showed up in the living room of Christina and Adam Murphy. This was in 2017, and Adam was very sick, Christina was sick, and obviously this was at the worst of the water crisis. The governor's top advisor stood in the Murphys' living room. Richard Baird was flanked by a muscular former colonel in the Army National Guard to his left and a Michigan State trooper to his right. Adam and Christina Murphy were expecting Baird's visit to be friendly, but that hope quickly devolved to unease as Christina stared at the military level of security circling her coffee table. It was surreal. Her gut instinct made her secretly record the meeting on her phone. When the colonel spoke, it did not shake her discomfort. He described himself as a former Black Ops soldier who would do anything for Baird. Anything. he explained, from gophering as Baird's coffee boy to scooping up his dog's poop. Christina found his tone to be bizarre. His particular emphasis on the word anything felt like a subtle threat. Why did the governor's right-hand man enter the Murphys' home with such a show of force? Richard Baird introduced himself as Governor Snyder's, quote, best friend, framing his presence as representing the governor. To others, he referred to himself as the governor's, quote, fixer. He was there on a mission. It was February of 2017, and Adam Murphy, like so many in Flint, was extremely ill from drinking Flint's toxic lead and bacteria-poisoned water. As Snyder's soldiers stood in the Murphys' living room, Flint had sunk to its lowest point in the city's history. Back in the living room of Adam and Christina Murphy weeks later, the governor's top advisor and his escorts were seated. Richard Baird, known as Governor Snyder's fixer inside the sewers of Michigan politics, was here to personally address their grievances. Quote, I think Baird began to see himself as the consigliere to Snyder. A source familiar with Baird's style and service to the governor told me. There Baird stood in front of the Murphys. Quote, if we're in a position to help you, we should help you, he boisterously claimed. He told Adam, you're going to be our lead poster child. The Murphys were floored. Baird was offering for the state to pay for expensive medical treatments for Adam. The Murphys listened intently as Baird presented what felt like a miracle at the lowest point in their lives. The state budget director, Baird explained, had previously worked at the powerful Michigan-based Blue Cross Blue Shield healthcare company. Baird boasted that he was owed a few favors. Maybe I could use one of them to help you, he told an excited Adam and Christina. As Baird spoke, he came off as both a government bureaucrat and a used car salesman. The couple didn't mind. They were desperate for help. What they asked for, what they needed, was for Adam to undergo chelation therapy, a treatment for heavy metal poisoning. During the therapy, chelation drugs are injected into the body and bind to heavy metals in the bloodstream. Toxins then pass out of the body through the urine. Baird vowed that if the treatment helped Adam, the state would make it available to Christina when she was no longer breastfeeding her newborn. The kids would receive it too. But there was a catch. The governor's right-hand man instructed the Murphys that they were not allowed to tell anyone that the state was paying for Adam's treatment. Baird framed the secrecy as necessary. It would take a lot of behind-the-scenes work to expand the treatment to all of Flint, he said. He cautioned that they should see if it helps Adam before getting other residents excited, that the state would pay for their treatment. Hiding that the state was paying for his treatment didn't smell right to Adam or Christina, but given their desperate situation, they weren't going to raise the stink.
So I'm really glad you read that chapter, and I think it really sets the tone of your book for a number of reasons. And I think it's a strong reminder, I guess, of the tone and the tactics that the Snyder administration used, maybe more under the radar during the Flint water crisis, to keep things from getting out to the media. And so I'm curious why you thought that was an important anecdote to start your book with, and what you think that interaction between Baird and who we know was one of the governor's top advisors at the time during the water crisis, and I wonder why you thought that was the way to start your book, and how you think that kind of sets the tone of what the Snyder administration, what insight it gives us into their approach to the water crisis.
From the beginning, as obviously you know, the Snyder administration and Rick Snyder was trying to portray this as just government, too many layers of government, bureaucracy gone bad. One hand didn't know what the other hand was doing, but that this was not intentional. This was just a tragic mistake, and nobody told me, and yada, yada, yada. I wanted to start because I didn't read the part, but the reason they were in Adam's living room is because he had gone ballistic at a town hall in Flint, rightly so, I think, yelling at government officials, and he got media attention. And it began to become a pattern that if a resident or an activist got a little too loud, started getting media attention, all of a sudden they would get a visit from Richard Baird, the governor's, a generous way of putting it would be his right-hand man. Some sources have said his henchman. And Governor Snyder had this, brand, I'm a nerd, I'm one tough nerd. So while he presented himself as squeaky clean, he was sending his fixer, that's what Baird called himself, to not just the Murphys, but the book details other instances where he's offering special deals from the state to pay for expensive medical treatment, to pay for Medicaid expansion for certain residents, to replace certain residents' service lines, their interior plumbing. And in one case, it's in the book, he just blatantly offered a resident here, I'll replace your fixtures in your house, your service lines, your interior plumbing. Would that make you happy and would that make you quiet? He said this in front of her lawyers. And the reason I started the book with that is just I wanted people to imagine this scenario that you're a sick couple, they have 5 kids between them, and the governor's top advisor shows up in your living room, to his right a state trooper and to his left an army colonel. That's not what you're doing if you're trying to give off the message that you're here to help. That's what you're doing if you're trying to intimidate. So that's kind of why I wanted readers to have that picture in the beginning of basically the guy to Flint residents talking to Richard Baird was talking to the governor. That's how he presented himself. So I wanted to start with basically the governor's de facto enforcer and his show of force in this Flint couple's home.
Yeah, I think the intimidation aspect really comes through a lot in your book, and I think was something that, anytime I've spent listening to these stories or similar stories from Flint residents, that has come through to me, but I often find when I read about it, or I think maybe what outsiders didn't necessarily realize was that level of intimidation that was going on. And it's not, I think in a lot of ways, Flint can be talked about as like a David and Goliath story, residents standing up and demanding, answers about their water and changes. At the same time, though, it's like it's more than that, because like you said, you have someone like Rich Baird sitting with state troopers. I mean, you're coming into a community in the middle of a crisis, and you're coming in with like backup. That to me feels like that just sets a stage that I think your book does really well, which is kind of depicts something maybe differently than people might realize, especially when I think publicly the Snyder administration often put out this sort of idea that the buck stopped with them, they were getting things done, they were sorry, they were doing things to fix Flint, and I think that's so much different than what you guys have experienced here and what we have observed.
Can I just add something?
Yeah, of course.
I think it's really important, and this isn't just about Flint, this is a tactic government uses everywhere, and it's to control the narrative. And Richard Baird's job during this crisis was to control the narrative. I mean, in many cases, they spent more money on sending out bullshit pamphlets to residents than on fixing the problem. But this is not in the book, but since he's here, this is about controlling the narrative. That good-looking gentleman over there, his name's Bruce, he worked as a contractor for many years, an environmental contractor, and he was walking around Flint with one of the busted pipes. So you could look inside the pipe and see this is what your water is coming through. It looked like a disease inside the pipe. And suddenly, Richard Baird wants to meet with him. And Richard Baird asked him, can I take the pipe back to the state? To Lansing, I want to give it to the environmental department. I want to look into this. Did you get that pipe back? No. He wanted to control the narrative. He didn't want this guy walking around town with a damaged Flint pipe. So that a lot of the book is about their In some cases subtle, in other cases very extreme efforts to control the narrative because they needed to control the narrative to avoid political liability and, in many cases criminal liability.
And I think another aspect of that speaks to, I guess, a second narrative that has been really common in the years since the water crisis became such a national story has been sort of especially that pertains to, I think, aspects of civil and criminal liability, is that there has been a very concerted effort to put out narratives and stories and data that makes it maybe appear as though the water crisis really wasn't that bad. People really, it wasn't as bad as you thought it was, and since then we have learned by looking at this retrospective data that actually everything was fine. The kids weren't poisoned, the adults weren't poisoned, and it could have been a lot worse, and we should be happy for that. And I think something that your book does also really well is you go back and forth between the experiences, the health impacts of residents in real time that somehow publicly these well-paid public relations, outfits have been able to sort of paper over that very real experience of needing chelation therapy. I mean, people may not know that one of the arguments in the ongoing lawsuits is that very few people in Flint needed chelation therapy. Very few people got chelation therapy. And it's like, well, is that because kids weren't poisoned or adults weren't poisoned, or is that because people prevented that access? And so I think that is really important. It's a really strong reminder throughout your book. And the other thing about this that's interesting is that Rich Baird is now suing the state for legal fees because he says that the Attorney General violated his constitutional rights, which is interesting. And so I think it's very timely that your book kind of lines out what these guys said, what these guys were doing, what did lead to their criminal charges, because unfortunately a lot of the most recent criminal charges, we don't have a lot of details about those. But I wonder, how do you see some of your reporting, whether it's Rich Baird, whether it's the governor, and maybe some of the criminal charges they've faced, and kind of how do you, I guess, sort of what insight we can get from your book about that?
Well, I think that my book, I tried to do a couple things. Number one, the story of what led to the water switch has barely been covered. I don't even get to the water switch, I think, until chapter 7. So we start like in the 2000s with Jeff Wright, if you know his name. He's the county drain commissioner so I tried to really show the plot, because I believe it was a plot to basically create a totally unnecessary new water system and leave Flint residents holding the bag, which unfortunately is what happened. The second thing I wanted to do was in kind of real time from the switch in April 2014, month by month, year by year, show the real-time cover-up. But the third thing was there was kind of multiple cover-ups, some intentional and some you could say maybe it was just incompetence. But the original investigation that was going on here objectively seemed to be gaining momentum. They had charged 15 state and city officials with serious crimes, including involuntary manslaughter. It also seemed that they were going after the money part of this, the KWA. The Attorney General before Nessel and the special prosecutor, they had charged two state emergency managers and the director of public works here, basically with bond fraud, because the KWA bond that came about because of a fraudulent scam deal. So what I tried to do was kind of show the truly unprecedented action. I mean, I spoke with many lawyers. They had never heard of an attorney general coming in, which was Attorney General Nessel. Well, first, they had never heard of really before a candidate publicly basically condemning an investigation that she had no actual access to. She didn't have any access to the evidence. She had no way of knowing, do they have cooperating witnesses? Are people flipping? You know, the term in the mob, are they flipping on each other? She had no knowledge of any of that, yet she publicly basically foreshadowed that she was going to clean house and overhaul the whole investigation. And what happened, unfortunately, was when she did that, officials that were cooperating stopped cooperating because they said, oh, well, she's just going to fire these prosecutors, so I'll take my chances. So they stopped cooperating. And then when she got in, she took unprecedented steps like dropping all criminal charges. Legal experts I talked to said that made no sense. Then when she recharged officials that she had dropped the charges against, in many cases she charged them with lesser crimes. And she did not refile the financial charges. So what I really tried to show in the book was all the focus has been on Governor Snyder, rightly so. A lot of the focus has been on Republicans. However, Governor Whitmer, she has involvement, it's in the book, and Attorney General Nessel, they've never had to answer for whether it was intentional or not. I cannot get in her head or her heart. She might be a very nice lady for all I know. But her decisions and the results was she sabotaged the investigation. And as a result, no one, as of now, is going to be held criminally accountable. I don't think that's just a tragedy for Flint. I think that's a disaster for America. Because if no one is held accountable for poisoning a community and then covering it up, why would other government officials elsewhere even pause and think about, well, maybe I shouldn't do this. Look what happened to those public officials in Flint. They won't. They're just, they got off with it in Flint, so we'll just go on. So I think the book, I try at least to show, I had sources within Nessel's world to show what was she doing, why was she doing it, and what the ultimate effects were.
And so to kind of continue on with the criminal investigation aspect, but maybe stepping back, because I think you provided a really good account of the original investigation. I call it Flint Water 1.0 with Todd Flood, the special prosecutor. And having lived through a lot of it and, being in court, out of court, we were in court every day for a year and a half with those preliminary trials and just knowing some of the stuff that was happening with the investigation, to actually read it in one sitting. There was stuff that I kind of remembered and had forgotten, and you're like, wow, this is really crazy, which I hope you'll talk about, having to do with, I think the immense amount of, I would say, potential obstruction of the investigation from the Snyder administration. You talk about wiped phones, you talk about efforts to control FOIA. So I wanted to unpack that a little bit more. It's a little bit in the weeds, but I think it's something that everyone here in Flint has probably suspected or known firsthand, that we didn't necessarily get all the information that existed. Like, yes, they put out thousands of emails, but there were thousands of more that did not make it past the gates. Like, yes, the special prosecutor, Todd Flood, did get a ton. He did investigative subpoena after investigative subpoena. It was a FBI level investigation, and they did get lots of documents, but there's a lot that they didn't get. So let's talk about that a little bit. I don't know if you want to, which part you want to start with. There's a lot there.
Well, we should say, number one, he doesn't get a lot of attention, but he should. Attorney General Bill Schuette, who launched this investigation, had a blatant conflict of interest because he launched the investigation, but he also wanted to run for governor, and he was a Republican. So based on my reporting, I believe yours too, he kind of let the prosecutors and the investigators kind of go up to a line as far as who he would let them go after. But it seemed to be different when it came to Snyder, because it's not so good if you're like the Republican Attorney General and you want to run to replace Snyder. It's not so good if you charge the Republican governor. Your donors, the Republican donors probably won't give you money, and you'll probably be a pariah. So Todd Flood wanted to stop screwing around and issue search warrants on the governor. They wanted to go in there and just take the computers, take everything. Schuette, based on my sources, he would not let them do that. Schuette had Flood and his team kind of working, trying to get documents and data through Snyder's lawyers. That's generally not how you handle a criminal investigation of this magnitude. You don't ask.
That's a civil investigation.
That's a civil investigation. A criminal, you're not asking the governor's lawyer, pretty please, with a cherry on top, will you please provide me your briefings and your phones and all this by this date? So that right,
their only choice.
That was their only choice because Schuette was the attorney general. So I believe Flood was, I think, trying to work this as an old school kind of mob investigation where you start with the lower level people, you try to get them to flip on the higher level people. Then once you get to higher level people, you try to get them to flip all the way to the top, like the mob boss. But Snyder and the state, I mean, it was just ballsy and brazen and out in the open. I'll give you an example in the book. After Snyder finally, in October of 2015, held the press conference and admitted that the lead was high here and the water was toxic, just a few days later, a bunch of phones from environmental department officials are dropped off into the state technology department, completely erased. So, let me repeat, the environmental officials who were involved with this cover-up, their phones were dropped off to the technology department, quote, wiped clean. There was no messages on them for the entire period that Flint was on the Flint River. Similar was health officials. Their phones, when prosecutors got them, when Flood's team got them, had no messages in most cases for all of 2014 and all of 2015. How does that happen unless you're actively destroying evidence? When I reached out to the environmental department, they said we don't care to comment. When I reached out to the health department, under Whitmer now, they basically said we cannot comment for what Governor Snyder's. I mean, that's destruction of evidence. That's illegal in most cases. You also had Governor Snyder, because Flood had to work through Snyder and his lawyers, refusing to hand over briefings. My book lays out in particular October 2014, which was 6 months after the water switch. I mean, that was like the big ground zero for a lot of this cover-up, particularly the governor's role. Based on my reporting, he learned about the deadly Legionnaires outbreak in October 2014 and did not notify you residents till January 2016. It was described to me like it was a firefight between the prosecutors and Snyder's lawyers. He would not hand over those briefings. There's only one reason you're not going to hand over the briefings, and that's because there might be incriminating information. You also had witness tampering. Based on my reporting, Richard Baird was talking to state officials before they were going to go under oath and basically trying to get them on script, tell them what to say, what not to say. There's also moments in the book where high-level officials are literally in the interviews. Flood is kind of grilling them, and either their lawyer or them interject to stop the interview and walk outside. In one case, the governor's deputy legal counsel stopped the interview twice in 8 minutes to walk outside because he was grilling her on how do you allow General Motors to stop using the water, but you allow residents and human beings to drink this. So there was a lot of just from Snyder to Baird to the environmental department, just destruction of evidence, witness tampering. We talked about the payoffs. I mean, I don't really think even a great filmmaker could come up with this many things for a movie. But this all happened, and a lot of it, frankly, I could do a 3-hour talk on the media here, but a lot of it, unfortunately, most residents don't know about because the media didn't really dig that far. So there was massive efforts to obstruct the investigation. Frankly, I do, because Attorney General Nessel fired Flood and his team, and based on my sources, she put in people that they might have meant well, but they were not the right people for this. They were overwhelmed. I think to this day there's probably key documents that were never handed over to prosecutors. And Dana Nessel, her investigation, they did it all in secret, so I have no idea what they even presented.
right? It seems like they got thousands of additional documents, but we will never know what those were. So we've been talking a lot about official documents and sources and stuff that has come, that we found in our reporting through and that you talk about in your book through, government emails, et cetera. But I know for both of us that a lot of what we found has come from residents. I mean, just recently I was looking for information on early 2015 and someone said, oh yeah, I've got all the videos of those meetings. I'm like, what? You can't find them anywhere on YouTube. And they said, yeah, and we can tell, and someone remembered what a certain official had said or a certain company had said that was at that meeting, and that has been so helpful for me and has been something I've learned a lot as a reporter to listen, and even though I don't always understand at the time, I try to just store it in my memory and remember it later when that information seems relevant. I wonder for you, what are some of the things reporting wise that have come from residents, and how, and maybe do you have any stories of stuff that has come out from residents that has been helpful for you in your reporting?
First off, I just want to say, and again, obviously I want the media to cover my book, so I'm not going to shit on them. However, I will say, I'm not from Michigan, I'm from New York, and I just think what's done is done. But if this is being live streamed, so if you're a local reporter from ABC, CBS, NBC, Flint Journal, it's never too late. I know that they think, oh, this is 10 years later and, it's not a story anymore. Talk to residents. It's always shocked me when I talk to residents, they tell me, oh yeah, the reporters, they show up, they kind of stay for 5 minutes, they get the shot. Maybe they talk to a resident for a minute and then they leave. I understand that, staff has been cut and a lot of these networks have less resources, but this is, to me, the biggest story still in Flint and Michigan. So talk to residents.
Keep your eyes on the prize. We're talking about some of the biggest companies and some of the biggest, most important officials in the country.
But number two, I would say, 60-70% of the book came from residents. I was fortunate enough, thanks to my media company, Status Coup, our viewers, fund us small dollars to keep coming back here. One chapter in itself is about my partner at the time and I knocked on over 400 doors in 2018. Amanda back there was one of the doors because Melissa Mays, who's a resident, she called me and said, she had knocked on doors, and she was like, holy shit, they're flushing. And I said, what are you talking about, they're flushing? And she found out that Snyder's environmental department was going to residents' homes and running their water and then putting in sample bottles. Not running their water the night before. I'm talking just running their water that day, in some cases for several minutes, and then putting the sample bottles under, which is against the law. You only flush, this is according to Aaron Brockovich, the only reason to do that would be to get a lower lead number or get no lead. So she tipped me off, and she found that on one block at a few homes, so I just got, all right, I'm going to start knocking on doors, and we knocked on over 400 doors, and we found dozens of examples of them illegally flushing. The current governor, Gretchen Whitmer, is on camera acknowledging my reporting, yet they kept that data that Snyder, that was the data that the governor used to say the water's safe, I'm shutting down the water pods. That was the data that he used to declare the water's restored in Flint. And so a lot of the reporting came from residents. A lot of the reporting, it was I get to know residents and then they connect me to other sources, whether they be the few good politicians here or sources. They connected me to sources that I can't really say who they were. But without the residents, that's what's so important. I mean, this book, I think your reporting and my reporting cannot happen without residents because, unfortunately, residents have had to do the work, in many cases, of journalists, lawyers, archiving residents. And Aaron Brockovich has said this many times, and she was nice enough to write the foreword for the book. She has said, city after city, community after community, she has found it's always the residents that are the heroes. It's the residents that are blowing the whistle on the corruption. So I, as a journalist, I've kind of taken the lead from the residents. And I tried my best because I didn't want the whole book to be just hammering you with horrible corruption. I tried to mix in just personal stories from the residents. One of them I'd like to share because it really screwed me up emotionally. That data that I just told you, that the governor of Michigan, he was sending his environmental people out to just cheat on the water testing. So he declared that the water was restored in April 2017. April 2018. And he declared the water was restored based on this bullshit testing I just told you about, where they were flushing residents. By the way, the EPA confirmed with me that they were doing it illegally, yet the EPA didn't punish the state or anything. 2 months after the governor shut down the water stations and declared the water restored, we were knocking on doors. I walked up to a front porch on Wolcott Street on the north side, and there was a mother sitting with her baby. The baby was like 1. And she had white sores all over her arms, legs, ears. She was 1 year old, beautiful black baby. And the mother is explaining to me they had just moved into the home like a couple weeks earlier, and her daughter's skin was clean and clear. It was only because she was bathing her in that restored water. According to Governor Snyder, the water was restored. She was bathing her in the water, and all of a sudden she started getting rashes all over. Her other child was also having rashes. She was like many in Flint. She didn't have a car, so she couldn't go get bottled water. She was also poor. So she was running out of bottled water. And she told me she was running out of bottled water because Snyder shut down the water stations. She told me, I'm even willing to call Child Protective Services on myself just to get water for my child. Those were the stories I was uncovering in Flint. That should be a crime. Here you have a mother who, her daughter is being poisoned. Her daughter's skin is breaking out in white sores and rashes. She's calling 211 for help. There's no answer. The governor just shut down the few resources you had for bottled water. And she's like, I'm so desperate, I'm going to call CPS on myself. And there's a lot of stories like that. And it's not over. I know the government has said the water's safe now, this and that. I think Kayla would agree. When I go cover a story, the first people that I talk to is not politicians. And it's not experts, many of whom are somehow being funded by the government. I talk to the residents because usually they have no reason to lie to you. So I talk to residents, and residents in the year 2024 are telling me that they still get rashes from the water and that it still smells in a lot of people's homes. And in some cases, the water's coming out brown, and they post it on social media. And just common sense, how could the water be fine if they have not changed all the infrastructure in the city? It's not just the service lines, the main pipes underneath the street. The water didn't just skip over the main pipes, and it's also the interior plumbing. So that's a long-winded answer. Most of my reporting comes from the residents.
And hopefully that serves as a reminder. I know that this has been obviously a very long decade, or I guess that we're at right now, but there are people like Jordan and I who are still working, are still listening to you guys, and everything you have documented along the way has made a difference and continues to make a difference. And I know it doesn't always feel like it, but it will continue to make a difference. So there are so many things we can talk about in this book. Let's talk about the financial stuff. I wasn't sure if we were going to get into that today, but it is, it's something that you and I talk a lot about, and I think as a lot of people understand, it's probably the part of the narrative of the Flint water crisis that has been maybe the most silenced and gotten the least attention. I mean, municipal bonds and whatnot is complicated, and so I think it's an easy thing to. It's a lot easier to think about a governor who wanted to slash a budget and switch people onto a river than it is to read a bond contract and realize, oh, actually, this bond contract says you have to switch to the river. And so let's talk about that a little bit, because I think you and I both like to say the Flint water crisis wasn't about saving money, it was about making money. And so what does that mean to you? And let's get into it.
Well, first I'd like to, break some news that's not in the book, but I think you should know, and hopefully the news outlets here will ask Attorney General Nessel about this. So, you know, as a journalist, you could put in, actually anybody, not just journalists, could put in Freedom of Information requests. And the government's documents belong to us because we pay for the government. So Kayla, myself, a few others have been putting Freedom of Information requests in for years, specifically for documents pertaining to the financial scam that caused all your suffering. And every time we were getting back, can't give you ongoing criminal investigation. So you kind of had to wait till the criminal investigation ended. Well, the criminal investigation ended because the state Supreme Court threw out the charges. So at the end of last year, I put in a Freedom of Information request specifically for, based on my sources, at the end of 2018, Todd Flint and his team, they had prepared briefing documents for incoming Attorney General Dana Nessel, kind of like a roadmap of their investigation before she fired them. And one of those roadmaps was a 52-page document called Racketeering Enterprise. Basically, it was the case they were building, the RICO case. And if you don't know about RICO, it was created in the 1970s to go after organized crime like the Sopranos type mafia stuff. But it's also used in certain, like government and other instances. So they were building a case, a racketeering case, specifically over KWA and financial fraud that led to Flint even using the Flint River in the first place, and Flint signing on for these bonds for KWA. So at first, Attorney General Nessel's office told me they did not have the documents. And I'm just telling you facts. I'm not bashing Nessel. I'm just telling you what happened. They told me they did not have the documents. Well, I have sources who have receipts that they do have the documents. So that was a red flag because they told me they didn't have the documents. And to be clear, these documents outline, the whole shebang, the financial scam. Based on my reporting, it includes who they were going to charge as well as what the crimes were for financial related to the KWA. Long story short, they told me they didn't have them. Then I did then I low-key kind of threatened a possible lawsuit. Then magically they said, we're going to look again. Then magically they found the documents, yet they're telling me they won't give it to me still. So just so you know, right now the Attorney General's office, they have said that they want, now that the charges have been thrown out, they want it at the very least to present to you all the work they did and what evidence they found. Well, I am giving her the opportunity, not just me, other people too.
Yeah, we hope that happens.
We're giving them the opportunity to release these documents. If they want, they could redact, they could black out who they were going to charge, but just keep the evidence. I could only speculate, but it just so happens the banks who issued the bonds for KWA were JP Morgan and Wells Fargo. JP Morgan and Wells Fargo happened to donate to a lot of politicians in both political parties. So that's that. But that's not in the book. I just wanted everybody to know that's currently going on. They will not give us the documents, and the legal reasons they're using seem kind of odd to me. But I want to get to KWA because I think the book, I tried to get into it where people's eyes wouldn't gloss over, because when people hear bonds, sometimes they... But I think there's one interesting part, and I'd love to know what you think, because you've worked on this a lot. So this is a long time ago, but in 2013, Snyder's treasurer, the money man, Andy Dillon, because they had put Flint in a financial emergency, if Flint was to spend more than $50,000, they needed the treasurer to sign off on it. So Andy Dillon had to sign off on Flint joining the KWA. Well, Andy Dillon, in my book, I have it, he's under oath saying, I told Jeff Wright, the Genesee County Trade Commissioner, that I will sign off on Flint joining KWA under one condition. Flint is a customer on the KWA, not part of financing the KWA. Meaning Flint would not be borrowing money to join KWA. That's what Andy Dillon testified to. He testified that Jeff Wright told him, we already have the money lined up for construction. We just need to know if Flint is going to join because it will influence how big the pipe is, because they have to know how many cities are going to be a customer. Well, Andy Dillon approved it, according to him, under oath, based on the promise that Flint's only going to be a customer, is not going to borrow money. Gerald Ambrose, who was also an emergency manager in my book, he's under oath saying Flint had no credit rating. Yeah. At this time, Flint could not borrow money because it had no credit rating. It was nearly bankrupt. Well, Andy Dillon resigned from office for personal reasons, and all of a sudden, there's just a mad dash of emails going on in communications. You have a J.P. Morgan executive involved. You have KWA's bond attorney, who happened to be the bond attorney for the city of Flint at the same time. And they're trying to figure out how do we get, we basically need over $100 million more to fund the construction of the KWA. And the construction season, which is spring, was coming up. So if they don't get the money lined up by spring, they're going to miss the construction cycle. And it might even jeopardize the entire project. So it went from, oh no, we have the funding lined up. Jeff Wright tells Andy Dillon, we just need Flint as a customer, not to borrow, to this plot to basically get a broke city an exception to borrow $100 million for a brand new water system that is not necessary. The emails have come out in the past. Detroit did not want to lose Flint as a customer because Flint was Detroit's biggest customer. And if Detroit lost Flint, Detroit's water is going to go belly up, which is what happened. So Detroit offered to cut Flint's rate 48%. So if you go to the store and it's 50% off, that's like a good deal. Somehow the Jeff Wright and others who said this was all about saving money and getting you all cheaper, good water, stayed with KWA. So there was a bait and switch that went on. I have no reason to believe that the state treasurer was lying under oath. And also, there are emails from Snyder administration officials, including the chief of staff, Dennis Muchmore, saying, does the environmental department have their head on straight with this? Because it seems like it would be cheaper for Flint to stay with Detroit. So I try to go into detail without boring people in the book that this was basically, it was one of these scams to just create an unnecessary new water system. And there was a lot of money to be had from this. And that's the part, again, I can't get into Attorney General Nessel's head, but you'd have common sense. How does one set of prosecutors and investigators that were working on it for the first 3 years, how do they see evidence of RICO, major financial fraud? You fire them, and then her team did not follow up on that. And in my book, I detail, and this is just a fact, the state of Michigan, if the KWA criminal charges had went forward in criminal court, the state of Michigan was on the hook for serious liability because the Attorney General's office under Schuette signed off on that administrative consent order that allowed Flint to borrow the money. So not only there's a conflict when the Attorney General's office has to both prosecute the state but also defend the state. The Attorney General, if they would have went forward with the criminal case, I mean, it's been said to me it could have bankrupted the state of Michigan because you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars in potential liability.
Yeah, and I think that also it brings us to an important point where there has been so much focus on the wrongdoing of government officials in what happened in Flint, and I think that's really important. But it often really skips over the role of private entities. And I think the bond is a really good example because if you look at the way the plans for the KWA evolved from, the 1990s to the present, like the economic model looked different at that point, I guess, or in the model of how Flint was going to pay for it, how Genesee County was going to pay for it, where you see things change, where suddenly Flint is being shouldered with this debt, is being required to switch to the river, is when the bond starts getting written. And a bond isn't written by a local politician, right? A bond statement is written by a lawyer. It's written by a bank's lawyer. It's written by investment banks. And so you really see this shift of like what the officials thought were going to happen or how they envisioned this pipeline evolving and how these financial actors come in and change the game for them. And I think that like that to me is a big part of at least what I've come to in my reporting is like seeing that there are multiple levels of, there are different groups with different motivations seeking different end games or whatever. And I think just for me, I have a hard time with how much the role of the investment banks has been overlooked, and the role of this bond in forcing Flint to switch to the river. And knowing that it was on March 20th, 2014, when that ACO, the consent order, which is what required Flint through the KWA bond to switch to the river, when that was signed, the governor and JP Morgan and other consultants were in a meeting together in Lansing. So, and as far as we know, I am not aware of any Flint City officials being at that meeting. And we know that document was signed in person in Lansing on March 20th, 2014. So I think that there is like a layer that it's frustrating to see how it gets obscured, and I think it's so important for all of us to understand how these decisions can get made, especially when it comes to infrastructure and water and things that cost so much money and make people so much money. Yeah.
I think you also should know that this crisis could have been stopped sooner, and it wasn't stopped sooner because of the financial part. So I explain in my book, basically the KWA bonds, they were written, and you know more about this than I, but they were written in a way that you had to start paying them back relatively quickly. So basically, in October 2014, there was an official in Governor Snyder's office, not like a low-level person, it was his number 2 lawyer, and she happened to be an environmental expert. She basically sent like a freak-out email in the middle of October 2014. She called it an urgent matter to fix. She said the Flint River has E. coli and all these other things. I believe she knew about Legionnaires but didn't put it in writing. And she emailed the governor's chief of staff, Dennis Muchmore, top lawyers, and she said, we need to switch back to Detroit. 13 minutes later, Governor Snyder's chief legal counsel, who, by the way, in the book, I obtained phone calls. He was calling the governor at 4 a.m, several times. Just so happened the same week that like major problems were going on with Flint's water, like 2 months after the water switch. I don't call anyone at 4 a.m. unless I'm drunk or there's like a real fucking emergency. Excuse my French. So, long story short, she sent that email, and it brings it back to Richard Baird. Richard Baird was not on she didn't add Richard Baird to that email. Somehow he found out she had sent in writing, the water is basically toxic and we need to switch back to Detroit. He goes up to her. He says, let's get on a call with the emergency manager at the time. His name was Darnell Early. Well, Darnell Early basically tells her it would be too expensive to switch back to Detroit. Well, what's more important? That one of the top lawyers who happens to be an environmental expert is saying the water is bad, and this was the day after General Motors announced they were going to stop using it. She was saying, she cited Flint residents saying they're lab rats. So in that moment, she was trying to do the right thing. Early said it would be too expensive to switch back. Well, he didn't specify why, but the reasons were, number one, they had already sold the pipe that connected Flint to Detroit's water system. They sold that to Genesee County, I believe, for over $3 million. $4 million. So they would have to buy that pipe back. Number two, they were already on the hook for the KWA bonds. So if they switch back to Detroit from people who are only looking at a balance sheet, then we're going to have to pay $1 million to Detroit plus the KWA bonds at the same time. Then you have at that time in October 2014, it was 2 weeks before Snyder's re-election. Snyder, this was at a time long before Donald Trump came down that escalator and he ran. This was 2014. Snyder, it was reported, was already angling to run for president. Well, having a water crisis probably isn't going to help you become president. So there was so many things going on, but financially, and Todd Flood, I believe, has said that in public interviews, they could have switched back and just eaten the money. They would have been on the hook for this money, but you would have saved lives. They didn't, I believe, because they already were on the hook for the KWA bonds, and also in the environmental order, that was written that allowed Flint to borrow the $100 million, there was a provision in that order, it's in the book, that mandated that while KWA was constructed, Flint had to use the Flint River and the Flint water plant. So both because of financial reasons and legal reasons, they did not switch back when they could have. Yes, people were still going to have health issues, but there's a difference between being exposed to this water for 6 months versus 18 months. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that summed everything up. And also, they would have had to admit that people were dying.
Yes.
I think admitting to kids being lead poisoned was somehow more palatable than the fact that people were dying a year earlier. And so let's talk. Do you want to read? Do you have another excerpt you want to read? And then we could maybe switch to the audience and take some questions.
Sure. I also want to make sure you know, because a lot of you just got the book and haven't read it yet or haven't gotten the book yet.
I know it's hard to talk about because it's very detailed.
So I got my hands on Governor Snyder was put under oath in 2020. It was confidential, so you'd never seen it before. I was able to get the testimony, which I'm sure he's not so thrilled about. There were several sections of his under oath testimony. He wasn't under oath in the criminal investigation. He was under oath in the civil investigation, where when I say unbelievable, I mean like truly not believable. Both unbelievable, but also not believable. There are sections where, when he testified in front of Congress, he was very black and white. I found out about the Legionnaires outbreak on this day, in January 2016, and I held a press conference the next day. Well, under oath, he was not so certain, and he seemed to have a lot of problems with memory, recall, to the tune of, I didn't count, but I would guess he said I don't recall probably hundreds of times. And I think this is important because A, it's never been out there, and B, he was the governor. I know that when he testified, it was 6 years ago, it would be hard to believe he didn't remember he said he didn't remember why he picked the emergency managers. He said he didn't remember if he even met with Michael Brown or Ed Kurtz before he appointed them. He said he didn't remember if he ever spoke with his top lawyer about the Flint water crisis. The same top lawyer who I have in the book was calling him multiple times at 4 a.m.
Who's from Flint.
And is now a judge in Michigan, by the way. But I'm going to read this passage. Testifying in 2020 in the major Flint water civil cases, Snyder was asked by McLaren attorney Brian McDonald about the October 17th, 2014 call between Leanne Schechter-Smith and Susan Bohm. That call, by the way, Leanne Schechter-Smith was the head of the drinking water office in the state environmental office, and she basically called the health department basically trying to stop them from issuing a public notice about Legionnaires. She said the governor's office had been involved, and we don't want to, quote, inflame the situation. So this was the chief water officer of Michigan trying to stop the health department from telling you had Legionnaires. McDonald specifically asked the governor about then state water chief Schechter-Smith saying, quote, the governor's office had been involved in responding to the Legionnaires outbreak. The exchange and Snyder's responses were astounding. I'm just going to read you the exchange. The McLaren attorney said, do you have any idea who that would have been in the governor's office? Snyder, I have no recollection or knowledge. McLaren's lawyer, is it possible that you have just forgotten, but that you were in fact involved as far back as 2014? I don't believe so, Snyder responded. McDonald, but from this letter it indicates, at least in Leanne Schechter-Smith's mind, that someone from the governor's office was involved. Snyder's response, that's what the sentence says. This is now my voice. I don't know. Seems like a former governor might remember if his office was involved in responding to a deadly waterborne bacterial outbreak in the major city he hijacked control over. My hunch was Snyder was lying. Todd Flood seemed to agree. Quote, this is from Todd Flood, quote, this evidence shows the governor, his administration, Health Director Lyon, and the Michigan Health Association knew about this outbreak of Legionnaires in October 2014, and they were interested in keeping the information from going public. Flood wrote about the calls and cover-up in his subpoena petition to get documents from the Michigan Hospital Association. He also cited Schechter Smith's panicked call to the health department about the governor's office being involved in Flint's water contamination, revealing that his office obtained corroborating evidence that supported Snyder's office being informed about this outbreak of Legionnaire's disease in October 2014. That's 16 months, by the way, earlier than Snyder notified you. Under oath in 2020, Snyder was asked whether anyone from McLaren Hospital had ever communicated with him about the Legionnaire's outbreak. Quote, "I recall that no one from McLaren had told me anything about those results," Snyder answered. But in response to McDonald's next question, Snyder seemed less emphatic than when he testified in 2016 under oath in front of Congress. The McLaren attorney said, "Did you ever direct anyone to inquire into Legionella prior to January 2016? Snyder's response, "I don't believe so." So it was very clear that Snyder was heavily lawyered up. He basically answered, "What is your name? I don't recall." And it just goes to show you, Flood tried to get Snyder's chief lawyer. He tried to get an interview with Snyder's chief lawyer. His name was Mike Godola, and I don't think Mike Godola per se was covering anything up, but he was the governor's chief lawyer, and he would have been able to tell prosecutors what and when the governor knew. Todd Flood asked the governor to waive attorney-client privilege, which protects communications between a lawyer and a client. He would not waive it. But the bottom line is, there's several parts of the book that I have word for word Snyder's exchanges with lawyers, where he literally is just pretending not to know basic things like, did you ever talk to your chief legal counsel when the water problems were getting bad? The same top lawyer who is in writing, this top lawyer put in writing, this is downright scary that residents are drinking from the Flint River, because his mother lived here. And he knew that the Flint River, he knew the history. So it just defies common sense. So I think that's, I'm hoping, a valuable part of the book that I hope the media picks up on, because it's new and it's never been out there. The governor of Michigan, who's known as one tough nerd, by reports, nothing got by him. He read everything in front of him. He was on his iPad all the time. He was like a sponge. Yet he doesn't remember, his birthday, basically, under oath. So.
And it's an important contrast, right? Because I think we all probably maybe understand this, but to zoom out bigger picture is, it's a lot easier to tell a reporter when you knew something, or it may even feel easier to tell Congress when you knew about something. But when you are sitting testifying under oath in a deposition while there are criminal investigations underway, to not want to put an exact date on a record or to say yes or no concretely, it raises a lot of questions if we, understanding how, perjury works and things like that, why an official might not want to say as emphatically or commit to certain dates and details. So I think it's a little bit abstract in some ways, because he is just saying, I don't recall, but it does tell you, it gives you some sense of at least maybe not wanting to commit to something.
He is saying, I don't recall, but he's very clearly contradicting his congressional testimony. In front of Congress, he said, I learned about it in January 2016, and I held a press conference the next day. In what I obtained, he's basically saying, I don't recall, I don't recall, I don't recall, I don't believe so. That's dramatically different, specifically on this deadly outbreak. And there's already been reporting, because Harvey Hollins, who was in Snyder's administration, he testified that he told Snyder about it in December 2015, a month before Snyder says he knew. My reporting is Snyder knew about it well before December 2015. He knew about it in October 2014. But the key to all this, in my opinion, is we already went through the financial aspect, but Flood's team, this is not like, I like Todd Flood and I don't like Dana Nessel. I don't care about any of these people. I care about you. But by the facts, Flood and the original investigators, they were building a case against Snyder for involuntary manslaughter. When they were fired, based on my reporting, they were not ready to charge him with that, but that's what they were going for. So they were not messing around, and they felt that they had evidence against him for involuntary manslaughter based on, and it's in the book, him knowing about Legionnaires earlier. And in the book, I also obtained a briefing that Governor Snyder got in October 2014 that mentioned the Legionnaires outbreak in McLaren Hospital. It's in writing. It says governor's briefings, McLaren Hospital, Legionnaires outbreak, and that's in writing that he knew about it 16 months earlier. That was one of the key smoking guns that they were going to go after him for involuntary manslaughter. And Attorney General Nessel has never even really been asked, but she's never had to explain, how is it that the predecessors were building this case against the governor, which, by the way, would have been historic. No governor that I know of, former or president, has been charged with involuntary manslaughter. How were they built? Where's the discrepancy here? How did they have evidence to go that severe? And Nessel's office ended up getting an indictment for a misdemeanor. That's never really been explained.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do you want to do maybe audience questions, and we can always come back with other questions? But I don't know. I know we've talked really, and we've gone very in the weeds, big picture. But I don't know if anyone has any questions for Jordan that they would like to ask.
Don't be shy.
Sorry.
Hi, Jordan. Thank you for your book. I appreciate it. Coming to Flint. My question is, when President Obama came here just about a year before his presidency ended, and he held a glass up of water. This is Flint water. And Snyder happened to be in the same stage with him. What do you feel about, have you seen the video of him taking the glass of water? And what are your thoughts about that? Do you think that President Obama was in conclusion with Governor Snyder as a major cover-up, as far as the federal level? Comments, questions?
I don't get into Obama in the book because it would have been 20,000 pages. Based on my knowledge, I don't think Obama was actively involved with the cover-up, but I think Obama was super, super naive. I think he trusted his EPA to be on top of this. He trusted his EPA to basically be overseeing the state of Michigan. I do not know, but I can only tell you what Michael Moore says. Michael Moore swears that that was not Flint water and it was water from Air Force One. I don't know if that's true or not. Even if it was Flint water, he took a sip, you know. So, yeah. But I think Obama, from what I saw, was very condescending to Flint residents in the way he approached it. And to be clear, and this is not just Flint, this is other places too, President Obama did not issue a disaster for Flint. He issued a state of emergency. And that is a very big difference.
But there is an importance, though, because I think there was an important distinction there, though. He did make an active choice if he had declared, because how do you declare something a natural disaster that was man-made? And I actually I know that at the time it felt like, how could he not declare a natural disaster? But as someone who follows the civil cases really closely, I do wonder how that would have maybe impeded certain aspects of holding some of these people accountable if it had been declared a natural disaster, not a man-made disaster. But it is still important to understand that he didn't. I think he marshaled resources quickly, but he kept a line, and I think saw it as, we're going to let Governor Snyder kind of hang himself, and we're going to maybe try to just hang back on this one. And he was in his last year kind of doing a victory lap, I think, in PR.
First of all, just let me explain. If you issue a disaster declaration, the federal government basically takes over. So they could have sent the Army Corps of Engineers in, dig up the whole city. Your pipes would have been replaced probably in a year, maybe less. I personally believe when the government has a will to do something, they find legal loopholes to do it. That's my opinion, not my reporting. When there's about to be a budget default, like you got the countdown clock on TV, They find ways, whether legal or not, to. So I think there could have been something done to get more federal resources in here. But to me, the EPA, although my book doesn't, I don't think the EPA was in real time involved in the cover-up, but the EPA was involved in my opinion, something even not worse, but equally as egregious, complacency. The EPA basically, instead of just stepping in, raising a public stink, calling out publicly the Michigan Environmental Department, warning residents, they were looking for legal opinions on whether they could take over and take over control of this from the state environmental department. And meanwhile, critical time was going. The environmental department, they found out in February 2015 that the environmental department was not applying corrosion control to your water. Yet the residents didn't know about that right away. So there's parts of the book that goes into the EPA's role. The EPA, what is the point of having a federal government if they are aware that the state is either intentionally breaking law, which the state did break the law. It is by law, if your city has over 50,000 people, you're supposed to add corrosion control to the water. That prevents lead from coming off. They didn't do it. The EPA found out about it, but they didn't come in and really do much. So I don't think the EPA is completely culpable, but I believe they are, when they say silence is, you're an accomplice through your silence, so to speak.
I have a question. Do you think the United Nations would have considered this a humanitarian disaster?
Yes.
On a scale of like Uganda or any of the other nations that are out there with 100,000 people being subjected to the suffering that had been done. So that's basically my question. Do you think if the United Nations had been involved, that there would have been a criminal investigation much larger, and that possibly the entire city would have been a crime scene?
I'm saying this humbly because I'm not saying, I'm some incredible visionary author. But I think if the United Nations knew half of this that's in this book, and I don't think they know, I don't think the majority of people know about this. I think it goes worse than, I think they would have considered it a war crime. Because crime against humanity, war crime, when politicians know that the water is bad, but they're not warning you, you are intentionally endangering people's health. And there are emails where the state environmental department, the chief of staff to the governor says, in writing, in March 2015, I believe, in an email, we could make their water safe. We could make the river water safe. At the same time, they're telling you the water is safe. The spokesperson for the environmental department is saying, I don't want the director to publicly say the water's safe until we get these tests back. But they were telling you the water's safe. So when you're intentionally endangering children's lives, the elderly's lives, everybody's lives, I think that goes beyond just like a humanitarian disaster. It goes to something more nefarious. And I think from the United Nations and the federal government, the House Oversight Committee knows about some of the stories in this book. They told me we're going to investigate it. That was 5 years ago.
Wow.
Elijah Cummings, who was a congressman and he was chair of the House Oversight Committee, he was actually trying to bring Rick Snyder back, but he died, unfortunately, tragically. So I think if the United Nations, if the few government officials in Washington that actually would want to do something about this, if they knew the full scope, because the tragedy of this is because of the way this happened, where Attorney General Nessel basically restarted the investigation, it wasted so much time that a lot of the statute of limitations has passed for charging people. And I think the documents that I laid out to you that the Attorney General right now is not handing over, I actually think, I can't say for sure, but I do think there's still, I wonder what you think, Kayla. I do believe on the RICO and the financial fraud, I do believe those still have a chance for criminal prosecution.
Also, I always think of the saying, sometimes the cover-up is worse than the crime. I don't know that that's the case here, but you still have ongoing acts of cover-up acts of a cover-up that probably do fall within the statute of limitations. And so I think, hopefully, the perpetrators watching at home keep that in mind. But I do think the question about international law is a really important thought exercise. As someone who's studied the wars in Yugoslavia, or why I got into journalism, watching that news coverage, and I follow The Hague and all of that, and I think constantly about if the international court had jurisdiction here, would they do something? Maybe not, but I know that the success that the international court has is a lot better than the courts have had here, and I think we should question how they would look at this. Did you have a question? So I feel like someone over here. Was you? Yes.
Hi. So I'm wondering when they're going to actually tell the truth, because all of the wealth, all the political power, all the business acumen is within a block of here. City Hall is like a quarter of a mile from here, and all we hear is oh, just wait. Oh, things are going to get better. Nobody's taking any action to protect the residents of the city of Flint. They're not protecting property value. The school system has been under attack. The roads, the water quality settlement. And I moved back to Flint in 2018, and I feel like it's I'm fighting all the time. Fighting about the air quality, because Eagle allowed the asphalt plant. Nobody even stopped or questioned or, they just let it happen. The PFAS contamination, they're over at the Buick site, playing around with the PFAS. I'll call it that, because they've gotten a lot of money, but they're saying that every 30 days it's moving I think a foot or something, but they've been, since the General Motors bankruptcy, they've been over there playing around. But, by my calculations, that's a 6-mile radius that the PFAS had an opportunity to travel from there. So, there's a lot of assaults that the residents are under. And, I'm very grateful for you taking the time to write this book, because there's no walls of protection. There's no individual empower leadership that I could say is actually taking any steps to protect the residents of Flint. It's just we're just exposed, and just take it however we give it to you and it. That's what we're being served. So do you think there will be a moment where they actually tell the truth?
If they're forced to, is probably what I would say.
I guess I'll start. I would just say, yes, people will start to tell the truth when they are forced to. And sometimes justice takes a long time, and criminal charges take a long time. But on their own, no. I don't think people are going to ever come to any of you guys and say, here's what happened. Here's where we were wrong. I just think everything we have seen is a desire to either deny what they personally have done, or because of their political ambitions, they want the water crisis to be over.
They want it to be over, but it's not over.
Exactly, right. You can't just wish something away, right?
Right. So I'm just saying, our lived experience is that the water is bad. So fix the problem. If they just fix the problem, that would go a long way. But the other thing I want to say is Jeff Wright, he's on the ballot today.
Oh yeah, he's really
unopposed for the Dream Commission. So I don't know that much about him, but he's been a continuous fixture, in this.
Oh, there's plenty about him in the book.
Yeah. But I think it's a good question. I don't know. Maybe you have.
What I'm about to say is easier said than done, because I wasn't poisoned, and I understand. I'm not gonna lecture people here. I understand people are just beaten down, and it's hard after 10 years to keep fighting and get out in the streets. But I actually think, to me, if you gave me the choice between this becoming a New York Times bestseller versus every single person in Flint reading this, I would choose every single person in Flint reading this. I think a big reason that this cover-up has persisted for so long and that your water is still crap and that there's no justice is, I would say, 90% of you in this city are not fully aware of the full scope of what was done. And that is done in many ways. I'm not going to get into the media for now, but between misinformation and gaslighting from the government, lack of aggressive reporting, and I do not think that anything is going to change until as many people in this city, I don't care if you're white, black, old, young, don't matter, find out that this is the biggest government cover-up of the 21st century. There's a difference between feeling it and having the facts to support it. Most of you, and there's still more that you and I don't know that we're trying to find out. Yeah. So this book is just the beginning, really. But I think if people truly understood the dark, sinister, orchestrated conspiracy here, I really think it might give you one last jolt to get out into the streets, because I believe things are only going to change if there's not 20 people at protests, but thousands, not for a day, but until they listen. And frankly, I don't even think it's city council. I'm not saying who you elect on the city is, I'm not saying it's not important, but at the end of the day, the money that you need for real justice to fix those pipes, I believe, why aren't your politicians locally demanding for universal health care for you? Right. So I think if there was a real resurgence of protest in the city, not just here, but outside the Attorney General's office, outside the governor's office, all the way to D.C., and with specific demands based on this information, I think they could not sweep this under the rug anymore. That's my opinion. Again, I don't live here, and I know it's easier said than done. Other than that, I don't see much changing because they have the playbook. Just say it's okay and hope you go away.
I just want to say I haven't lived here all my life, but I lived here over about 25 years now. Since I moved to Flint, Flint is like living in a kingdom compared to other towns I have. The same family that one of the people shot dead in the plains in the 30s for wanting a living wage are here running the show. Our politicians suck up to them, and they get handed kudos, and the people are forgotten. That's what's really going on. And I could tell you, just like downtown here, they own everything here now. They own everything, and I guess the people pay rent to certain. I was in Blackstone's one time, and the lady said that was the owner talked to a guy I knew that knew her. She said, I don't have to pay taxes. They said they just let them, because the only people paying taxes is the people here. It's the poor. Yeah. And no ARPA funds went to help the people. It all goes to their 501c. They used water emergency fund to redo a Capitol. Yeah. They said they put in new seating. I was in there after they wrote that. It was still the same seats in there at that time. I haven't been in there since. But I think they're laundering money here. It's evident. And the people don't have a voice here. If people go to city council, I've seen the cops haul them off to jail if they don't like what they say. If you get up and stand up and say what you see. I live in a neighborhood that was nice, that was all shop workers, retired in people still working, the working class neighborhood. It's a slum. Diabolically, they put I got 5 liquor stores in a 1 mile area. If you live in a town where they care about the children and the people, they don't do that. They inundated my area to fail. You would call it, I've been thrown out of planning meetings trying to fight this. At the same time, they said there was no money to mow parks here. I went to a planning meeting just for kicks, and they were planning on building a new park downtown or fixing up the one near U of M. And and they're telling us there's no money. I raise my hand and I say, how can you build a new park when you say there's no money to mow the parks where people live. And they told me, what am I doing here? Why am I here? Well, it said Freedom of Information Act. You know, so the whole thing, this is a kingdom. This is not a town.
I have a question. It's actually a bit more of a concern. I have children that have children, so I have grandchildren. My children are telling me that if they move into Flint, if they live in the city of Flint for 2 years, if they can prove that, or at least 2 years, if their children wish to go to college, that they would get free college if they've been residents for 2 years. So, to me, knowing what I know about this because of being with Bruce, it scares me to think that my children would be willing to move into the city where the water is terrible, as we know here, and could cause them all kinds of problems, and my grandchildren all kinds of problems, because they're being, pardon me? Lied to, yes. They're being advocated to that their children would get free education. So they're thinking, well, gee, if only one of my 3 children took advantage of this, it would be worth it in the long run. Perhaps we should do that. I'm telling them, absolutely you do not. Not now, not yet. Because they haven't fixed the problem. Because like you said earlier, they haven't changed the infrastructure. They haven't changed the pipes. They haven't changed the mains. So the problem can't possibly be solved. The water can't possibly be good. Therefore, it is a health risk. So I guess my big concern is that they're trying to suck in this younger generation to come in and be residents by offering this as a gift. It just seems wrong.
I think, there's a give and take with that. I think all you can do is, I think the things that you guys are saying, that life isn't better. It sounds like life is maybe not as bad as 2015, but it's not very much better. And you're concerned about young children growing up here, and you're concerned about that. And I know this is this is easy to say, as Jordan said it, but somehow you're going to have to get that point across to public officials, and that you don't think it's safe, and you know it's not safe. And
can I just say something?
Yeah, and then we have one last question in the back.
I think part of, I'm not saying that's a bad program. I think it's a good program. But I think part of why they're doing those things is to change the so that Flint is not known for the water, and that they could kind of distract. Oh, look, Flint is giving, this good program for education, this and that. But at the end of the day, I don't care if you're a Democrat, a Republican, a tree hugger, or like a right-wing person. We all need clean water, and free education is not going to do much if you get sick.
Exactly.
So I think that, to me, people, whether it's about water or anything else, you cannot take action if you do not know. You cannot take action if you do not know. And I think that, as frustrated, rightfully so, that you are basically living in a kingdom, as that nice woman said, I think that this is bigger than the local officials here and the foundation, which, by the way, we haven't even gotten into Mott, but there's a whole chapter on Mott in here. Oh, yeah. So they are not excused, even though they don't like me. So I get what you're saying, but I believe if you're going to change the cycle here, if you're going to change the pattern here, if you're going to unnormalize and kind of, I think, debunk this narrative that this water crisis is something that happened in the past but is over, and you're going to make it urgent again, I think it's going to take kind of bypassing the local route and going to the state and federal government. Because I think even if you had Jesus, Mother Teresa, Gandhi on your city council, at the end of the day, I'm not saying it doesn't matter who you elect locally, but they're not controlling whether you get Medicare for all. They're not controlling the settlement. They're not controlling the mains, replacing the mains industry, getting money to replace your interior plumbing. That's coming from the state and the federal government. Your city officials should be advocating for that. And Eric Mays, the late Eric Mays, was. But at the end of the day, the money and the justice...
You can go around them.
You can go around them, is what I'm saying. And I know it's easier said than done. And if I lived here and I had to deal with this foundation and these city councils doing their bidding...
You're in jail, too.
Yeah. But I'm just saying... where from an outsider's perspective, to me, I think you could go around them, and I think you're going to need to go around them. And to be clear, the Mott Foundation, I'm not saying they don't do some good things, but at the end of the day, if Mott Foundation has billions of dollars, why have they not just said, we'll replace all the pipes in the city? I'm sure people would prefer that than more cultural centers, a new farmers market, a new Capitol Theater. Charter schools. If the Mott Foundation truly, as they say, Flint is their number one, they have the money and the endowment to replace all the mains underneath the street, to replace all of your interior plumbing. I'm not saying, hey, they should provide you health care, because they're not a health care company. But I'm sure if you took a poll of residents, would you prefer that they beautify these 5 blocks here?
No.
Or would you prefer that they help replace your damaged infrastructure? I think we would know the answer.
I know we can talk about this all day, so we are pressed for time. So we have one question back here, and we're going to start wrapping up in a minute.
The talk went around. My question was, I think that I read an article by you in a Detroit paper. I think it was a conversation with Mayor Neely, where Mayor Neely was talking about the Motts having a hand in choosing the emergency managers. And so...
Isn't that interesting that no Flint outlet and no Michigan outlet covered that?
Right. I mean, we don't have a critical... I don't feel like we have a critical press. I teach at the university, and we just lost our university newspaper. So, I mean, there's no one except citizens to actually get out and research and think about what's going on and then try to do something. I agree with you. But I like the idea of, putting this back on the Mott Foundation, because I think it's so... You talk about complacency. Where were they when it was all going on? And then voila, we get these big, the preschool over by Mott or Durant, Turry, over by Kettering. And then we get the health and wellness district, and we get all these things, these gifts, and they seem so generous. But, yeah, who are they? Yeah. And I mean...
I have a very firm answer for that.
In the book, right? Is it in the book?
I have said this, not just about Flint, but I have advised this nationally. In my experience, I'd love to know your thoughts, Kayla. I think 60%, perhaps 70% of the reason things exist the way they exist, and we live, in my opinion, in an economic Hunger Games, is the media helps cover it up. I know that I shouldn't say that here, because I want the media here to cover the book. So I'm not going to, I'm not going to go so far, but I will say this. I'm not from Michigan. If I got this information, if Kayla, who doesn't live in Flint, has gotten this information, what's the Flint Journal's excuse? What is Detroit News, Detroit Free Press? And by the way, I don't know the people there. I'm sure they're good people. Maybe they do care and they just have their own reasons. But I will say is this. I have always said, and there's details in the book, by the way, your local ABC station killed a story about the deadly Legionnaires outbreak. They had evidence in October 2014. They had documents that showed McLaren had a Legionnaires outbreak, and they mysteriously killed the story. I have reached out to ABC here several times asking, why'd you kill the story? They don't respond. Long story short, I would add the media stations to your protest list.
Yeah.
Because you could protest City Hall, but I think you need to be protesting. There are, and I say this humbly, because honestly, this is not about me, but in a sane system, most of the details in this book are major news stories. There's no legitimate journalistic reason I could think of that the local Flint channels. So what you mentioned, that I got the mayor on tape basically not only saying that Mott chose the emergency managers, he basically called Mott racist. I didn't, he did. I didn't even bring up race, he brought it up. The fact that no outlet here covered that, to me, indicates they are somehow they are for whatever reason they don't feel they could report critically on Mott or Snyder. So at the end of the day, I would ask the journalists at these outlets, I know you need paychecks and I know you need to feed your family, but at the end of the day, if you're not going to do journalism, go do something else.
The majority are run by Sinclair Broadcast.
Yeah.
That's a big issue right now.
Yeah. So I think why this cover-up has been able to persist for 10 years, and by the way, why the water switch was able to happen in the first place is because you do not have investigative reporters sounding the alarm beforehand. They weren't even digging. The people that were sounding the alarm were residents. I mean, there are people here who are activists like Naira Sharif who were screaming before the water switch about this. So I would say, I know you only have so much bandwidth and we all work and have kids and grandkids, but if you're going to get out there and demonstrate, I would add the media to your list because they are basically, to me, through their silence and burying these stories, they are helping to normalize your whole city was poisoned, and they are allowing the people who harmed you to basically remain free. So.
We have one last question.
Well, one of the things that, and I know you, Jordan, you're from New York, but I was born here in Flint, born in 1976. I remember in 1979, there was 80,000 General Motor jobs here. You can make an entire vehicle except for the frame and the tires. Now, unfortunately, it has eroded away. We spoke earlier about Roger and me. Now, at the time there was 50,000 jobs. But now, for my last reading on Google there was about 8,000 jobs left, and that's just over here at the truck plant. We had 4 assembly plants here at one time, and then parts plants. Now, my great-grandfather, he was working at Fisher 1 during the sit-down strike. Now, he didn't want to participate because he was afraid for his job. Do you feel, and plus another thing, this whole thing really kind of started back, you know, we don't drink out of the Flint River, we don't fish out of the Flint River. There's a reason why we don't do that. Because years and years and years, General Motors dumped all their toxic sludge waste into the Flint River. And that was before EPA, pre-1970s, but it's still there.
Not just General Motors.
Well, not just General Motors.
So much else.
But General Motors is why
The biggest.
Flint is why it's here as way it is today because of General Motors. And General Motors was born here. The carriage town's just right down here where they were formed. William Durant hotels over here. I just feel like we need to be more, instead of worrying about Middle Eastern terrorists, we have economic terrorists in this country. And I think it's far, far, far scarier. I tell everybody at work, you have 3 main enemies. You have corporate America, you have the 1%, which would be like Jeff Bezos, you mentioned Amazon, and then Wall Street. Because they have been bleeding, sucking the life out of this community, at least since the 70s. Michael Moore with Roger and me, and Bowling for Columbine, with the shooting of a 6-year-old girl. Did you watch Bowling for Columbine? All because the mother was and that's another issue, and this was under the England administration, was forced to repay back the welfare to the state, a poor black mother, because she had been on welfare, and they were ordered her work down the Great Lakes Crossing in Auburn Hills to pay back the welfare money. Now, we give companies billions and billions of subsidies. Now, I read an article the other day about John F. Kennedy taking away the subsidies from like these corporations. Like we should take away from oil, even General Motors, even the bankruptcy, which I think is, pardon my French, was a bunch of bullshit, because that was the way to get concessions away from UAW. I mean, we're poor, give us concessions and we'll go to the government. If you don't, like I said, we'll go to the government. We'll force it down your throat. And I remember there was a worker on election Roger and me. He said, why are the unions not as good as they used to? He said, friends with management. Friends with management. And that is, I hold that dear to this day as a union member, because never be friends with management. But my question is, do you feel like there's a direct or indirect responsibility of General Motors as far as the water crisis here?
Yeah.
You just asked a question that's going to get her going.
I'll let you answer that.
I would point out that, like you said, there is a legacy of pollution that has been ignored outside of Flint, just straight from pollution to the river, to everything from... Okay, you will often hear that the Flint water system was built for 200,000 people, and now there's only 100,000, and so that's 80,000 now. And so that's part of why the water crisis was so bad, because you have this water system that was just not, it was way too big for the amount of people. But if you go back to the 1950s and look at the water usage and why the water system was so large and built for such large quantities, 50% of the water in the city of Flint was being used by General Motors in manufacturing. It wasn't when 50% of the people moved out of Flint, when Flint lost 50% of its population, that's not why it lost half of its water usage. The city of Flint's water usage dropped because General Motors and these factories left. So yeah, I think when you talk about, you have a company like General Motors that built up the city of Flint, that polluted the city of Flint, and then left the city of Flint, and didn't just leave like you see in Michael Moore's documentaries, and like you guys have lived it. They ripped factories out of the ground and went and took their factories to Mexico or somewhere else in the country. And I don't think that sort of, I don't know what you would call that. You're like deflating a city. They have not answered for that, and that's a huge contributor to the Flint water crisis, because that's why the city of Flint's water system was overbuilt. That's why the tax base had gone down and wasn't able to pay for all the infrastructure updates. Like, those are the root causes of so much of what we see in Flint. It's often attributed to maybe crime or white flight, and those things are important, but it's the General Motors flight or the manufacturing flight that really, that really caused that.
And I'll just end on this. Based on my reporting, I believe this is the biggest government cover-up in American history. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say this because I don't know of one bigger than this. I don't know of a cover-up that involves the federal government, the state government, the city government, the county government, Wall Street, foundations. I mean, that is a significantly large cabal. When we hear government cover-up, the kind of psyche of America is to think Watergate. Watergate was a bunch of knuckleheads breaking into an office. Nobody died. If there wasn't a president involved, nobody would care. Okay? The mafia, if you've watched your films, children are off limits. You don't kill children in the mafia. You can kill anybody else. Children were intentionally harmed here. Whether you want to say intentionally or just they look the other way. And I think that, I hope this book, and this is going to be a marathon. This is not going to just be a week of talking about the book and then forget it. Like, I'm going to have to keep pushing this, and Kayla is continuing to dig. But this is an ongoing cover-up. It's not like something that happened in the past. They're currently covering it up. I've already told you the Attorney General will not hand over documents that would totally show the financial scheme that caused this. And I believe if that evidence got out, I think there'd be some pretty powerful people upset. I was told by sources based those documents, they had never seen this kind of fraud. And these are like serious criminal. I can't go into detail about the sources, but they had never seen this kind of fraud. Okay? So to me, I'm hoping that residents just word of mouth, because I believe word of mouth still matters. I mean, we took a car here and I told the person in the car about this. And they were like, oh, I'm going to find out about it. And we told the waitress earlier about this and she bought it. I'm hoping that residents just push and tell your neighbor who is checked out, get this book. If they can't afford it, whatever, maybe we'll figure something out. But bottom line, we need to get the facts in here to as many people as possible, because I do believe people are rightly numb and tired and fed up and checked out. And the only way to kind of reverse that is to make sure people know the truth. Because I would say most of this is going to be brand new to most of you. So I really thank you for coming. I'd be happy to sign anybody's books. I thank Kayla for interviewing me. Thank you, Egypt, for having me. For some reason, other Flint bookstores don't have speakers. I wonder why. And I hope if the media watches this at all, I will gladly apologize to you. And,
in exchange for a story, yeah.
I will gladly apologize to you.
We'll give you our reporting.
I will eat crow. I will happily hand over some of the stuff I have if you want. But please, for the love of God, just do some journalism. That's all we're asking. Just do some journalism. So thank you, everybody, and I look forward to coming back again.
Thank you. Wow. And I know we're going to leave here just in this next week just telling so many people and neighbors about this experience. I just want to say just what you mentioned. If you have a book, you can form a line. Again, like, we don't got that much room, so just if you can file a line maybe around the bookshelf here, then you can get your book signed. If you haven't purchased the book yet, there are more copies available at the table. I will be back here, and you can purchase it. But thank you so much. We appreciate you coming.
And thank you. Just hang in there. We're still here. People are still paying attention.